Hi, and welcome to our coffee break segment. We are a part of One Word Writer podcast, and I would like to introduce our guest. We have Patricio Maya, and I probably said that wrong, even though I practiced a little bit. He is the author of Reggaetón Cruise, which is available on Amazon. So I want to thank you all for joining us. And if you have any question, please put it in the chat and we will get to it once we complete our interview. So, Patricio, did I say that right?
Tish, you got it. You got it right. Perfect.
We want to celebrate you, but I want you to tell our audience who you are and your greatest achievements that led to your success as a writer.
Okay. Uh, I think, well, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me
It's a
here on your show. It's great to be here. It's a good way to start a Monday too, talking about books and literature. And so thank you for that. In terms of who I am, I'm a writer. I define myself as such, and a writer is a writer who writes, right? So I'm a writer when I'm writing, when I'm reading, and when I'm walking around. So I think that's really important to me that I'm a working writer. I stress the word working writer, meaning that it's not just an idea, but it's a way of life almost, I would say. So I really define myself as such, and then I'm also a reader. I don't think I could be a writer without being a reader.
That's true.
Uh, so I've been a reader for years, and I love literature, I love books, all kinds of books, and there's a link between that and my writing. And as of late, I've been becoming an audiobook guy. So I'm listening to a lot of audiobooks, and I'm defining myself as an audiobook person as well. So that, and everything that being a writer brings to the table, I think I I would recommend that you figure out for yourselves what you want to do and how you want to do. In my case, when I start writing a novel, it becomes a routine, and I'm a writer who likes the routine of writing. That's how I would define myself, and that's how I get my work done, I would say.
I love that. That is really good. Okay, so where are you from originally?
So I was born in Quito, Ecuador. Quito is the capital of the country of Ecuador, being the highest capital in the world, up in the North South American Andes, um, south of Colombia, north of Peru, west of Brazil, in the Pacific on the Pacific coast. Um, and yeah, pretty much I was born there, and I grew up there until I was 12 years old, and then we migrated to the United States, to California, and I've been living in California since then. And I've lived in California, New York, and a few other places in the States. So
Have you ever
uh,
lived in Texas?
I've never lived in Texas, but I've driven through Texas maybe two times.
Uh huh.
I've driven through Texas through two times, and those have been very intense experiences.
I can imagine.
Uh, and very intense heat, and you think you'll drive through it quickly, but it's a drive. So you're not the same afterwards. It's like a whole territory to drive through.
That's true. Okay, so I want to ask you, what are some of your obstacles that you had to overcome as a writer, and how
Hmm.
did it impact your writing process?
Well, that's a good question. I've had a few obstacles. Okay, so
Mhm.
first of all, English is not my native language. I
Right.
didn't speak English till I was 13, 14 at all.
Wow.
So, and then I wrote my first book in English by my mid 20s. I was starting to write, articles and stuff like that. So like it was just a matter of, I mean, it seems like a long time, 10 years, but in order to write it on a language that is not your own, it's not that short of an amount of time. So I think that was a great obstacle,
Hmm.
like personally, and I think also in terms of writing, I still write in Spanish, but this particular novel I wrote in English, And I think, a lot of times, like with there, I mean, it's happened before. A lot of people writers who write on a language that's not their own, like Vladimir Nabokov, uh, who else? Other writers that don't write in their native language, and I think, well, I never thought I'd be one of them, and here I am, it's sort of an international kind of writer in that regard.
That is such a talent. It really is. It's a hard enough to write in your own language and then
But
to
you know what? I
learn.
would say it gives you something, some kind of perspective or something, because you're
Right.
outside a little bit. So it gives back in that way.
That's true. So let's talk about some of your earlier work before we go into Reggaeton Cruise. You are a poet. I love poets.
Right.
What was it about the flow of words that inspired you to write your first book of poetry?
Mm, that's words and their flow, right? Mm. So I'd been living in the States for a few years by the time I rediscovered poetry.
Okay.
A few years, 3, 4 years, but I'd been so immersed into my English language adventure, like 3 years of like just being immersed, especially when you're a kid, a teenager. And so I took a Spanish class because I already spoke the language, and it was like a literature class in high school,
Mm,
AP Spanish. I remember Mr. Casillas, that was the name of the teacher, a Mexican teacher, and he had us read some poems, and I read some poems by some Spanish writers, in particular Neruda, who's from Chile, the Nobel Prize winner, and I thought, oh wow, I recognize those rhythms, those rhythms of the language in Spanish.
uh,
I'd been so focused on my English sort of adventure voyage, and then I'm like, here I was like yanked back to the Spanish world, and I'm like, oh my God, I know those rhythms. Those are like the old country's rhythms, like what I left behind. And I latched on to poetry that way. And I started writing in Spanish.
mhm.
And that's been a constant, poetry in Spanish, more prose in English, for some
True.
reason.
So, Reggaeton Cruise is your first novel. What inspired you to make the shift from poetry to writing a full fledged novel?
You know, I would always have trouble in terms of like, I would do like 30 pages, 40 pages. I would start novels throughout my 20s.
Okay.
And then I wouldn't like complete them. I wouldn't finish them. I would lack the stamina, the focus, and not the imagination, but the kind of thematic focus. Like, I'm going to write about this, and just bring it home and finish it, even if it takes like a year, because sometimes that's how long it takes, right? Or longer.
True.
So, and sometimes I would run out of steam at like 60 pages at the most. But then I'd be like, okay, that's not a novel. That's not going to, what am I going to do? I have 40, 50, 60 pages that I'm just, letting sit there. And so one day, while writing a scene, I was nearing the point where I would run out of steam and I would not know what to say, and I would just put it away, and then I wouldn't come back to it. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to write my way out of this conundrum by writing. So I decided to like forget about the scene
Hmm.
and just let the poetry flow within the novel, right? And so I created a scene where the actual characters, like a kind of stream of consciousness. The character is just saying whatever comes to his head, and so I just started typing, and that was my bridge.
Wow.
So and after that, I have 2 novels. One of them has not been published. Contains that, those scenes of like those bridges when I don't know where to go. I default to the poetry, and the poetry gets me out of there. So, it's a tool.
I was talking to my friend, and she's in the chat about your book, and I said, there's a flow to his story. You can feel the poetic flow in your story. I was able to pick that up. So,
Thanks. I'm a poet. Essentially, I'm still no matter how much prose I write, the poetry is always the basic, tool, building block.
hmm and I can feel it. So, this is a sort of a technical writing question, or I call it a gift. And this is based on your book.
Yeah.
How were you able to weave in each unique voices of your characters into this compelling journey that represented a global melting pot of diversity? And the reason why I asked, I have read some books in the past and there was tons of characters and you can get lost. You don't know
Mm.
who's who, but your characters, I knew who was who. I didn't get lost. That's a
Oh, great.
skill.
That's such a
How
gift. That is a gift.
that
Seriously, for you to say that, that's so awesome to hear.
it was, I did not get lost. So I figured, okay, how did you learn to do that? Because writing, you may be gifted with it, but it's still a technique too. Was you
Right.
inspired by some books, or you had some
Mm,
mentors or experience, or what? That was good.
yeah. I've done some reading, and I guess, I just let this, I don't have a technical answer for you because the kind of magic goes on in the subconscious.
That was really
And
good magic.
like, okay, so here, I mean, I do have a kind of theory about it. Okay,
Okay.
so uh, the characters get cooked up or get created inside of the imagination, the subconscious, and dreams and all of that, right?
True. Yeah.
So I let that happen, and I respect that process. That it's gonna be whatever it's gonna be, right? So I'm just gonna be the one bringing it out. However, once I have the kind of characters that I want to do with the different kind of voices,
Hmm.
then I shape it. I literally create a map, a visual map. Like A is going to happen first. It's going to like chunks of story,
Okay.
right? When I have the map, the chunks of story, then I kind of reconnect with the dream voice, let's say, or the subconscious voice, and I let that voice kind of take it forward. Um, but I'm a little bit in the dark as to how it happens, and I think that's kind of like part of the good thing about it, that I don't know how it happens. How they're just there. You know, sometimes I feel like I didn't write it; it just wrote itself.
It was good. I mean, for your characters and how they intertwine together on this
Mm,
journey, it was like a full circle in a way. You started
yeah.
with an introduction of your characters with their own
Mm,
story, and throughout the until the end, it was like a connection. Everybody connected, everything connected. I
mm,
was telling one of my friends this morning, it was like we was talking about home and how we are all interconnected in some kind of way. And what I got out of your book, there's no place like home. You try to run away from home, you go to this other country, you
mm,
see and experience all the different cultures and meet people. But when
mm.
it comes down to the end, you realize how you value your own home, because a lot
Right.
of them did in the end. They went through an experience where they appreciated home. So I said, home sweet
Exactly,
home.
the kind of traumatic experience. The themes of the novel. Sometimes, I mean, I try to do comedy, and there's a little bit of horror in it too, or like at least difficult political situations and
Yeah,
whatnot. And so it's kind of, I think you're right. It's about home, and also the characters' dreams. Like, where do they want to go? What do they want to achieve? And they want such different things.
they do.
Like I'm thinking of little Amy, who wants to be a vegan yogi, retire in some vegan yogi kind of place in Eureka, California. And her boyfriend, the Liberian refugee, Mamadou Anderson, is like, I'm not going to become a vegan yogi. I want to be a businessman, you know? And so each one has those dreams, and they just go in opposite directions, and they're seeking for their own place to settle down into, I guess. That's home.
Yes. So your characters, and I love characters. That's my favorite thing to
Yeah,
talk about in books. So your
right.
characters in Reggaeton Cruise, were they loosely based on people you knew, people paths that you crossed both online and offline?
Mm.
And how
Uh,
close were any of these characters? How close did they depict bits and pieces of who you are in your life?
right.
So that's two questions,
So
two big questions.
right. So they were. So the first the so the second part of it,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who said this, but I think a psychologist, might have been Freud or something, said that for every dream, in every dream that you have, you're all the characters in your dreams.
Wow.
So if you have a dream about you're walking down the street and you meet a friend, then both you and your friend are different parts of your psychological world, you know. And I think, well, there's a huge connection between dreams and novel writing. It's just we're sitting down to give shape to our dreams right in front of a computer or whatever, that thing we're using. So in that sense, I think they're all parts of me, or like my desires, my fears, whatever, and they're all kind of like little parts of me.
Mm-hmm.
And to answer the first part of the question, some of them are more based on real people than others.
Okay.
And to tell you the truth, I have become more engaged with the ones that are completely, at least to my mind, made up.
Okay.
So the character of Delphine, who's the main guy, right? The At least one of the main characters, he's based off of a real viral star that, based, and
Mm-hmm.
then I completely fictionalized and added, more than 80% of the stories made up. But like part of the seed is real, And then other people, for example, Mamadou was based on a friend who one night told me a story, an acquaintance really, that became a friend later, that told me a long story about, his life in a refugee camp in Liberia. And I was so ignorant about Liberia, so I went to look it up, and it blew me away. It was a former American colony. I didn't know that. So things like that. So, and then I completely made it up. So like other characters are made up, and some are real, and it's a mix.
They all seem real. It was like a whole different world to me. I felt like, God, I'm so sheltered, because some
Mm,
books are based on, in my opinion, real life situation, things that happens for real. And just to be aware that this stuff is really going on just opened my eyes and made me want to.
what in particular would you say like shocked you or made you feel that way? I'm just curious from a
Okay.
writer's
Um, when he was little, when he was 15, when he left home and was going,
perspective.
that was tragic to me. Who was that?
Right.
How you say her name?
Del-
Sandra
Delphi,
Rita.
Delphine, which is dolphin in Spanish. Yeah, the dolphin guy.
Yes. Oh my
Mm,
gosh. And just to realize that children are coming over, as migrants over here, and the things they have to go through, the
right.
kidnapping, and you touched on, I just assume rape or something like that was going to go on with him when
Mm.
he used a machete to kill that guy. Well, I don't want to give
Yeah,
anything
yeah.
away.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, give it away as much as you can, because I believe that actually that's gonna, get people to be more interested in it, the actual point. So I don't mind giving it away in terms of that, but like, yeah, that's such a thing, right?
That
Like,
journey, and then the gang, the three little boys, him and two other boys he met along the way, just
mm,
the whole journey,
right.
mind blowing, for a child. I
Yeah.
always think a child need to be protected by the parents at all
Mm.
times. I know that don't really go on in the real world, but just reading about it, it really hit. Yeah.
The crossing is not the biggest deal, because okay, so like he's a boy whose father dies from
Right.
the Andes virus, and then it's so unfortunate because the place where they live in doesn't have roads that are good enough for them to take his family to take the father to the hospital. He might have been saved.
True.
Okay, so he's not. He dies, and then he feels responsible because he's the firstborn and the boy, and there's a sense of responsibility that befalls upon him, at least as he sees it. And then he's like, "Okay, I'm going to go up north because the neighboring countries are worse off." So it's regions also, right? And so anyway, he decides to move up north to the United States because without much knowledge, he's a sort of naive,
Eve,
right?
yes.
And then, but the crossing over into the United States is not the biggest sort of hurdle. The biggest hurdle is getting through Latin America with like a few bucks in his pocket and,
No.
16 years of life experience as a rural indigenous boy who's even Spanish, he's not even a fluent Spanish speaker. So that he's even from within the like Latin American community, he's already ostracized because, well, he's fully Native American, and he
True.
gets discriminated against, you know. So it's tough, but a lot of the I think a lot of it, he's rural, right? He grew up in the countryside, and you know a lot of those things that he knows from being in the rural countryside, he brings into his trip. You know, like there's one scene where he's like he runs out of food, and there's a lot of trees, and I think it's in southern Mexico, in the Oaxaca region of Mexico, and he's like, okay, what am I going to eat? And he looks at the trees and he doesn't recognize the fruit, so he doesn't want to eat something that might be poisonous. So he looks at the birds. When the birds eat that, he's like, hey, that's edible,
And
you
that's
know.
smart. I mean, who would really think that, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I just can imagine my mind would be all over the place if I was in that situation. I don't know.
Mm.
But it was so deep. I mean, I just, that one really just kept me in. I like the gaming that you added in there too, because I live in a house full of gamers. So I was able to
Yeah,
relate to that
you
really
know,
well.
I hope they don't use, you know, that language that the kids use. And you know, I really I caught
Well,
myself. You know what? Am I gonna use this at the especially at the beginning of the novel? You know,
right.
because the teenagers are you know the way they express themselves sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, you know what? I was a teenager once in the public schools of LA,
Mm-hmm.
and I know the way sometimes unsupervised teenagers speak or talk to each other, and particularly online with their names and all of that world. And I said, you know what, I'm just going to portray it that way. But that was a little tough, even for me to read now. It's like, gee, you know, but because I just wanted to portray reality that way.
Yeah, and see, now I'm real picky on what I want to read. I don't like cuss
Mm,
words or anything. And I got into your story and your characters, and I told a friend, I said, he actually, it was real. He didn't
mm.
sugarcoat it. I have gamers, my kids, they have said those words playing games. So
Okay.
I was able to relate because it was real. It wasn't fake. You wasn't trying to sugarcoat it. You was
Yeah.
in character with that. And I respect that a lot. I really did.
Thank
And I
you.
had to look at it
That
from
means
that.
so much because I thought like, oh my gosh, she's gonna put it away or something, you know. But
I
I'm so glad
thought
you
about
didn't.
it. I'm not going
Yes.
to kid you. But then again,
Okay.
I had to step out and look at it
Yeah.
from the content of the character. You know, because
Right.
if you would have changed it, it wouldn't have been real, you know? So it
Yeah.
was very real. I can
And
respect
you know
that.
what? You know what the funny thing is? It's like they're kids playing video games, and the language is so over the top. But in reality, they're just pressing buttons.
That's true.
Delphine, who's the rural migrant, he's not saying any bad words, but at the end of the day, he has to like defend himself and use his machete to keep himself from being attacked.
Yeah,
You know, so I mean, that's a kind of interesting uh, dichotomy.
that was. So Reggaeton Cruise had deep topics, very deep topics in your storyline, such as globalized world we're living in, the how super connected we are with
Yeah.
technology and digitalization, which can cause, as you said, our lives to spiral out of control. How did the pandemic affect your writing process?
Mm.
Because I heard a lot of writers say because of that, you know, it was a global thing, the pandemic. And a lot of writers I have spoken with couldn't write. They were
Mm.
so taken away from the writing element, they couldn't write anymore. It was facing anxiety, just all kinds of issues. Some was able to use that time to write. How did it affect you in your writing process?
It affected me in the sense that I didn't have many things to do
Mm-hmm.
because particularly during the worst part of it, which is when I wrote it. So I had to either be disciplined enough to write it or find something else to do. And I decided to write. That was my outlet and my thing to do. So in a way, I was kind of blinded to the outside mess because I was with my own, you know, working through my novel. But then I came to a break in the novel, and I said, okay, I'm going to take a breather,
Mm-hmm.
and that's when I literally stepped out of the page and went outside, and it was just the intersection of social problems was such that I couldn't believe it. You know, like the pandemic, the uh, protests and counter protests,
Right.
just the presidency, the all this political and social turmoil, homelessness. I just stepped, like, literally, I was so into the book, and then I stepped out, and I couldn't believe it, the amount of, like, social sort of collapse that I was seeing, and then that must have influenced me, because, like, towards the end of the novel, there's like a kind of a nightmare scenario, okay, which is what would happen if the political fringes of our political system fused, got together, and so that's the political nightmare. Like, if the fringiest political elements
Mm-hmm.
of both sides, of all sides, decided, you know what, we've decided we want to start anew, and we're going to work together. And that's, it's a little over the top, maybe, but not, but at least it's like something that it could be like a warning,
Right.
uh so that, I guess, that's how I dealt with it.
So, how did you come up with the story idea? Because it parallels what was going on in the world in a way. It
Mm,
does.
yeah, yeah, but so, like, the thing with the cruise was already set up,
Okay.
right? Like,
Mm.
I think the essential part of the story is you get a migrant, and you tell his migration story to
Right.
the north, and then the migrant becomes f- uh, mm, he becomes famous, but he's the unlikeliest person to become a viral person, right?
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
he releases his video on YouTube, and people go like, "Oh my God, this is so ridiculous that it's great," right? And they start, and suddenly, a few, what can happen in a few years? I mean, life changes, right?
True.
Well, he blows up, he becomes super famous, and we catch him again when he's performing, on the Reggaeton Cruise, and
Mm-hmm.
that's unbelievable to the reader, because it's like, how could this boy be now a performance artist on a cruise in the Caribbean? And so all these, and I wanted to bring everybody in, to that meeting point.
I like that. That was good.
But I do know that, okay, so this is gonna be, there was a French writer who said that, who made a really controversial statement. I'm not saying it's true or anything, but he made this statement, and he said, about the war in the Persian Gulf back in the 90s or something. He said the Persian Gulf War never took place. And he's like, people are like, what are you talking about?
Hmm.
And he said, well, it never took place because it was shown live on CNN. So, like, most of it was done for show or entertainment, or, like, while people, while there was engagement, there was a big element of uh, showing it live and using it for entertainment and rating by the networks. Like, I guess that's what he meant, right?
And I can understand that too, why people will think that way. Yes.
Right. And but at the same time, I do understand that also could be problematic and all of that. But you know what? Just the statement in itself,
Hmm.
it's interesting, right? That nowadays, a lot of the most politically hot issues, or things that are difficult to deal with in our society, are also made into entertainment, and that makes it much more difficult to deal with, because they're both entertainment and real issues.
Right.
So I decided to take that to the, well, I'm just gonna, so there's a problem, there's a terrorist organization who takes over the cruise, you know
Hmm.
and what that was a point of, like, it's a cruise, so it's fun and modern and all of that. But it's like both sides, the mess of the world and the funnest part of the world, like, are one and the same. And I guess that's what I wanted to show.
And I felt that because it made me realize I don't want to go on a cruise.
No, but that's not what I'm
I know that was
thinking.
your point, but I started thinking about all the possibilities. What if this really happened? You out having a good time, and your ship, you on a cruise, and it was invaded by terrorists. You never know. I mean, that's how
Right.
my mind went.
But from the terrorist perspective, it's
Hmm.
like, okay, so there are, like, eco terrorists, right?
Right. That's
So,
true.
right, so they decide, you know what? So the cruises are, I mean, this is factual. I researched it. A cruise pollutes the same as much as a small city.
Mm.
Cruises are one of the most polluting entities, there are in the world, you know. So like I guess from their, I mean, not to just to see it from their perspective in terms of that, but to the people going on it, it's just entertainment.
That's
But you
true.
know,
Yeah.
it was obviously they didn't do right in doing that, but they're in their mind, it's like, okay, you got to stop what's going on, and then you know the gamer is involved in some way in that, but that I don't want to give away.
Don't give it away.
Yeah,
I loved
yeah.
it. But you just made everything just come to life. You know, real situation. The whole world. It was just there. Okay, so what who was your favorite character? I have to ask you this. Who was your favorite
Mm,
character?
uh, that's a good
Gotta
question.
pick just
My
one. Just one.
yeah. Mm.
Let's see if we
You
can.
know, from a moral and ethical perspective, I think Mamadou
Oh,
Anderson is somebody I really, you
uh-huh.
know, and he's not somebody like would do what I would do.
Mm-hmm.
He's just a different person, but like I really like how he handles a lot of the situation. You know, when he gets, so he's in Florida, right?
Right.
And he's dating a sort of semi-famous, like sister of a famous guy in Japan. And so there's an incident with the cameras, and he pushes somebody, and it gets caught live, and you know, so they call him from Japan, and they say, "Hey, do you want to come on to the show and become sort of, you know, featured?"
Right.
And he's like, "I don't want to become famous that way. You know, I don't want to be some toy for
Right.
entertainment
That's
for the
smart.
48-hour news cycle." He's like, "You know what? My girlfriend is gonna go to Eureka
Mm-hmm.
and become a vegan yogi person, and I'm not into that. I'm gonna go back to work." And I think that the value of work
Mm-hmm.
is something that I really appreciate in him. Plus, you know, all that he went through and all of that. So I like him.
I didn't like her at first. What's her name? Sandra.
Sandrita. Oh, she's completely made up, right?
Oh, I couldn't stand her. She was one of those
Right,
characters you love to hate, but I saw the
right.
growth in her.
Full circle.
And
Yeah.
I fell in love with her. I did at the end.
Wow. Yeah.
I
That's so
loved it.
great. You know, I'm glad somebody has adopted her because she's so problematic at first, right? With like she rejects Delphine, and she's very
She's
like, this is
smart.
my turf. You know,
Hmm.
you're a foreigner, you're out, right? And
Right.
later she catches him like years later, she's like online and she's like, "Oh my God, how is he, like, I know this boy," right? And she becomes a
Yep.
fan.
She had me angry. She took me through some emotions. Well, she just stood
Mm.
out because she was
And,
like a
and the
bully.
way she stands up to her mom too. I mean,
I
you know.
know. Yeah. And I realized that was a heart. I didn't know that at first until it got to the when she realized who Defina was.
Mm. Right.
And I realized, oh, there's a heart inside of her. So
Right.
I ended up loving her in the end. I really did. Mm-hmm.
Oh, great. You know, psychologically, she's probably the most complex, I think,
Yes, poor girl. Yeah.
because you know what, she's so tough, right? And but that's just like, and because her mom is so sweet in a way that, you know, too much sweetness can be bad because there's no edge to the mother, so she has to be the only one showing all the bitterness,
Yeah.
you know. And she's like, and then at the end she has that realization, you know what, being too sweet and being like bitter is just like different sides of the same coin,
That's
you
true.
know. uh Being a pushover or whatever her mom is, and then she's like, okay, tell me the truth, and then her life changes. So I agree with you that she's a great character.
I love
And
that character. Yeah. I mean, at the end, I realized, oh, I love her. I watched her
so
grow.
it's not only men, because you know, like a lot of the characters are men, but you know,
Right.
like this woman is a complex character too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just want to emphasize that, because you know, I just I want people to know that there's complex characters that are both men and women.
That's true. That's very true. So let's talk about your publishing process for Reggaeton Cruise. Did you self publish or go through a traditional publish? What was your initial thought to get your story
Okay.
out there?
So neither, because I publish with a small publisher, and that's not a traditional publisher.
Okay.
but it's not a big publisher in the sense that it's not going to get me the wide distribution that would that like I don't know, Simon and Schuster would get me, Schuster or whatever. But I have a friend who who publishes, and I submitted the book to him. He
Mm.
liked it, and he published it, and he's published other books of mine and other writers, and so it's what we call a boutique publisher,
Okay. Yes.
so
I'm aware of that.
it's got some of the benefits of the big publisher in that other people help you out, but
Mhm.
it's got some limitations and very clear limitations as well.
Okay.
So
So, what do you hope readers gain from reading Reggaeton Cruise?
hmm. I think uh, getting to appreciate all sides of the contemporary experience, because we all are immersed in the connected world. I mean, there's no going around that,
That's
you
true.
know, and but we all live through it differently, and there are so many experiences that are all valid.
Hmm.
uh, but that's a little bit difficult to say that two people who hold completely different worldviews can have valid experiences. And I think that's what I wish, I hope the readers get. And entertainment, I hope they're entertained by it too, like just it's hopefully it's not boring to read, it's like
It's not boring at all.
right. So it teaches you something, but it keeps you entertained, because otherwise, I would have just done a lecture on globalization. That would be it. And I didn't want to do a lecture on
Oh,
globalization. I
thank
wanted to
you.
do a book full of characters, you
Your
know.
characters portrayed it really well. No, the book, and I don't like reading. I always say long books, and it really wasn't. And I had looked at the pages. I was like, that's not a lot of pages. But the way you broke it down, it made it seem like it was a lot. But it was
Mm,
good. And each page, I just kept turning because you want to know more about this character. What's going to happen next? So it was one of those page turners. So a person will not get bored with the story. So our
great.
final question: what are your next
Mm.
steps for Reggaeton Cruise? Audio book
Um,
or what? What's your
so we are in the talks to get we have a reader to do an audiobook.
Ooh.
And also what I got to do next, and if anybody, I'm just going to put out there, I want to do readings. Okay, so I've done a few interviews, and so that's been really helpful in getting me to talk more. You get used to talking about the book, and you become better at communicating what the book is about. So that I've done quite a bit. Okay, and I have a few left before I decide to move on to the next step. And the next step has to be readings. I want to get out there and read with people and just take questions and all of that. So I'm going to promote until December in terms of like doing the video and the blogs and all the podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
But hopefully starting next year, I will do a few readings. So
That's
that's next. That's next. Readings and the audiobook. And I think after that, I will feel satisfied and say like, okay, I got to move on to whatever's next.
oh, well, that's really good. So how can our audience connect with you? I have a link in the
Mm,
description for y'all
mm.
to go to Amazon to purchase
Yeah.
Reggaeton Cruise. So how can our audience connect with you?
Okay. So I have a website for the book, and it's called reggaetoncruise.net. I'm sorry, Reggeaton cruise, like a cruise, and then .net. It's not .com. If you put reggaetoncruise.com, it's going to take you to like a place to buy tickets to go on a real cruise, and you don't want to do that. Maybe you want to do that, but for to get info about the book, you want to go there. And yeah, that's a good way to, there's like a mailing list place where you can enter it there, and I have a book, an essay, a criticism that somebody wrote, and I'm going to be uploading this interview and other interviews that I have on there as well. So
Oh, that's good.
yeah.
So we have some guests in our audience. We have Ian and Nick. They said hello.
Hey,
And let's see. Let me go through. We have Crow. She's here today, and Nick is
All right.
excited. Uh, Crow said audiobooks really help, especially when time to sit down and read is limited. So they were
Right.
looking for your audiobooks. And Ann also
Right.
says that she's an audiobook connoisseur. So yeah. We have Shay in
Okay.
the house. And yeah, Ann said poetry doesn't come as easy as prose does to me, but I love to write and read poetry. So she has that in common with you.
Yeah, and you too, right?
Yeah, I hadn't written a real, I guess, poetry in a long time. I do haiku, and that's like my meditation, my moment before I actually get engaged into my writing.
You
So,
know, I enjoy the haiku of Basho, you know, the
oh yes,
Chinese Japanese Matsuo Basho, right? That's the haiku is great.
I
Love
love
haiku.
haiku. I tell people it's for me is to appreciate the things we take for granted, just to
Yeah,
acknowledge and be aware, even of the
yeah,
silence around us. That's why I love haiku so
yeah. It's
much.
compressed.
Let me see. Anne said, "Does this mean that when I see myself in a dream, but it inspires me to tell a story from the character's point of view, does that mean the character is a part of me in relation
Mm,
to what you mentioned about characters in
yeah.
dreams being a
So I think they could be a part of you in the sense that they might be like, let's say it's something you want to do with your life. If it's an idealization, right? I think that could be a part of you. If it's a fear, so it's not you necessarily like as in your identity, I think, but it might be just fears, hopes, you know, in that sense, it all because you're generating the dream, right? Your psyche is generating. It doesn't come from anywhere else. So in that sense, it makes sense that it would be an expression of your own you know, complexities, desires, all that stuff, right? So I would say yeah, you know, but wow.
so
But take it with a grain of salt. I'm not a psychologist, okay? Yeah,
I dream of my story all the time, my characters. That's how I
yeah.
write. I dream about them. I don't know. I psych myself out before I go to bed to dream the next chapter, and they
Have
are
you ever
so
struggled with like,
real.
naming a character and then you'd have a
No,
dream?
I
So I've
love
struggled
names.
with that.
And
And
then,
then I go to bed and the next morning I wake up with a name because I
oh
the dream gave it
wow,
to me.
that's
Yeah,
good. Oh, I love
yes.
names. I usually know their name before I know the personality or anything, and it just match perfectly.
Some people are really gifted at names,
Oh, I
you
love
know.
names. I do. I love the names. So I would like to thank you for joining us and being a
Thank,
guest on our show. It was such a pleasure. And I
thank you for your interest.
enjoyed your book. Yes. Let me see. Anne says one more thing. She says,
Yeah.
I see myself in dreams related to my story, but when I wake up, I find out that I see myself as my character in a dream. Hmm.
Mm,
Oh,
so
Nick is here. Nick Sturgeon. What a great idea. Coffee break discussion. Welcome, Nick. He's from the UK, and it's a
oh,
pleasure having you
hi
here.
Nick. Hello. All right, great. We have international readers like
Yes, we
that.
do. We do. We have a lot of UKs over here. And yeah, it was a pleasure. I hope you
Thank
come
you, Tish.
back in the future with us
Thank you.
for your future books. And I really appreciate the time. You all, please go to Amazon. Look at the link in the description. I'm going to add more links. Y'all reach out to
Mm,
Patricio and
yes.
you make sure you reach out to him. And the best thing you can do for an author, read the book, leave an honest review. And I
Excellent.
appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being a part of our show.
Thank you so much. Great. I had a great time, and it's a great way to start the week.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Bye,
Thank you.
y'all.
Goodbye.